From our research and discussions, it has become clear that their own titles and regulations, or those authorized by the state, are irrelevant pieces of paper. They don't have the standard mechanisms that connect them with reality and produce economic growth. What are these mechanisms? First, property rights mechanisms. A good title allows you to adjudicate your property, lease it, to transfer the right to someone else, to exploit it for personal use or profit, and use it as a guarantee. A good title opens up access to credit and insurance. Such functions are what add more value to goods. They can be compared to the blades of a Swiss Army knife for cutting, sawing, opening, filing, and so on. The titles that the natives receive, however, have practically no function. They are comparable to a knife with only one blade. These titles intend to provide security for an asset. However, given their limitations, they are continually invaded and their titling records are out of date. For that reason, their business credibility is virtually non-existent. These titles are only valid within the community. In other words, not only are they isolated from the rest of Peru and the world, but even from other communities in the jungle. A native property title actually disconnects indigenous ethnic groups instead of uniting them. The lands of the majority of the communities are not identified using standard geographical references. There are, in fact, 3 distinct types of mapping systems that are incompatible with each other, all of which generates overlapping boundaries and leads to conflicts between native communities, settlers, oil companies, mining firms, and logging operations. Finally, deficient titling does not allow these people to defend their natural environment and, for example, be compensated for preserving their ecosystems. Therefore, it's quite clear that there are 2 types of title in Peru. One with mechanisms and the other without them. It's like these 2 clocks. They seem the same, but one has machinery and works, while the other, the indigenous one, has nothing. The mechanisms of property are invisible. It's complicated, laborious, boring, and not very romantic stuff. But God is in the details, and property as well. The second mechanism for development are good business rights. They bring such benefits as limited liability, professional leadership, separate from political interests. You can issue shares in return for investment. You can accumulate stock and transfer both the tangible and intangible values of any given enterprise. The Amazonian natives, on the other hand, do not have any of these advantages, since their titles do not distinguish between private and communal assets. They operate without limited liability and thus incur high risks, and nobody wants to give them credit or capital. Since their titles do not distinguish between their own goods and those of the community, they do not have the legal documentation required for guaranteeing credit or raising capital. And when a native moves from the community, he forfeits his property. Therefore, his capacity to accumulate assets so as to build capital is almost zero.
Y lo que nosotros vemos es que porque se los han querido solamente comunidad y colectivo, no les han dado acceso a esa ley que es lo que les permitiría organizarse productivamente.
Definitivamente, nosotros queremos herramientas, o el Estado, por favor, que sea creativo, pues, ¿no? Y para ser creativo tiene que ser parte también nosotros para decir al Estado, esta ley hay que hacerlo así. Y bueno, tener esa herramienta para poder nosotros también tener pues crédito. Por ejemplo, un doctor, yo digo, quiero hacer un crédito, no tengo título de mi casa, nadie me quiere.
My native friends, don't let anyone sell you the notion that you be a microenterprise.
En sus casos, lo que han hecho las tribus es que se han unido para delimitar propiedad que es de ellos y crear corporaciones, es decir, empresas que están poblados de esquimales, como son ellos, pero que solamente tienen un enfoque económico. Y frente a eso, entonces han dicho, nosotros queremos nuestra parte del petróleo. Y queremos utilizar nuestros beneficios para formar a nuestra gente, para que nuestra gente también se eduque en petróleo, se eduque en minas, se eduque en madera, y para tener ahorros suficientes para no solamente quedarse en la microempresa, sino meterse en la gran empresa. Y eso les ha permitido, con poder económico, proteger sus tierras. Entonces, si alguien viene de afuera, ellos son los primeros en pedir, no, yo lo compro antes que lo compre alguien. Y entonces sus poblaciones pueden vivir de cualquier manera que quieren. Unos, los que pescan, pescan. Los que quieren cazar, cazan. Los que quieren ser agricultores, son agricultores. Y los que quieren otros tipos de carreras administrativas, también lo hacen. Pero la idea es crear ese espacio. Ustedes también pueden participar en la macroempresa, como lo hacen indígenas y tribus en varias partes del mundo. Ustedes están al lado del petróleo, el oro, la madera, la palma de aceite. Es justo y lógico que también tengan la posibilidad de integrarse a su entorno productivo.
How do you achieve this? Well, without property rights, you cannot succeed, because without property, you cannot create capital. Therein lies the mystery of capital. To understand this, let us observe how companies who exploit natural resources in Peru and other developing and ex-Soviet countries operate. First, they get a concession, a local private property title for the territory they want to develop. Then they strengthen their right by availing themselves to multinational conventions and international treaties signed between Peru and the country where they have set up their company. That gives them a super property title, because Peru is now obliged by both national and international law to protect their rights. These include the right to freely determine the modality of production that works best for them, to leverage their assets, to repatriate their profits, and to be guaranteed that neither the law nor the agreed upon tax rates can be changed. With all this protection, this gives them a super duper property title, which they can then go to the international capital markets and convert their Peruvian titles into money for investment. You see, that's how Peruvian territory with well-documented titles can produce not just flora and fauna or a one-story house, but also capital. It is the property title that generates the capital, and not the other way around. And what do native Peruvians have for obtaining investment, credit, and technology? Frankly, aside from dirt, they have nothing. All of this because this nation has been sold the false belief that being indigenous is incompatible with property rights. It's important to ask the indigenous people themselves what they think and what they want, and not listen only to those who have romantic or preconceived ideas about them.
El 70% quiere adaptarse al desarrollo o al mundo globalizado, que digamos. Pero existe también un 30% que todavía dice, bueno, esto hay que hacer, nos queremos quedarnos acá y no queremos todavía la influencia de ellos porque nos pueden perjudicar o pueden desaparecer nuestra cultura. El 90% de los jóvenes ya tiene una visión ya más empresarial, que digamos, o una visión ya más de querer desarrollarse, de querer ser algo más en la vida, no solamente quedarse en la comunidad y ser a los 16, 17 años ya ser un padre de familia o ser cazador